And it then, because of the way the films were screened and used as a catalyst and bridge for active discussion, people started to strategize. It accelerated the process of development thinking. And people said, well, now, maybe if we had the high school on the middle of the island instead of in this community or that community, then nobody's going to be jealous of the other, and we can all fix our roads up and get to the high school. And they also had a motel right on the middle of the island, which sort of became, in those days, the focus for development activities on the island. So the film, in that sense, in the hands of animateurs or community development workers, social workers, whatever you want to call them, became a catalyst and an effective catalyst for social change. If you had just shown those films in a darkened room, and after it was all over, everybody clapped politely and you got up and went home, I don't think that those films would have been a catalyst for very much. And even today, if you go back to Fogo and ask people what they thought about of the films and its role in development, there might not be a very sharp memory of those things because it was part of an overall growth process, and the film was only one tool in a number of tools that a good field worker, community worker uses. And it's very important to remember that. Those films also were shown on Fogo first and to the people so that they could, if they felt there was anything damaging in those films to each other or themselves, they could remove it or take it out. And that became built into the process and even more formalized after, where individual approval screenings of certain persons who were in a film or video would look at it and say, yes, that's what I wanted to say. Yes, you may show it to other people, I don't mind. And that was very important for maintaining trust, because film or video is very easy to manipulate, and broadcast media does it all the time with very little regard to whether they're hurting what is usually a very delicate social web in a community. You can get somebody saying something pretty bad about somebody else and destroy them very easily, especially when you use it in the mass media as we have now and today. So that kind of trust was very important so that that type of manipulation of people's lives would not take place. Another thing that happened with these films that was relatively new, if not unique in those days, was that after the people on Fogo Island saw the films and gave permission for their screening elsewhere, they were brought here to St. John's, which was the seat of power, and shown to the cabinet members in the Newfoundland government. The president of Memorial University at that time was terrified that the premier, Joe Smallwood, would be incensed and take away the university's budget or fire him or something. He said, we can't do that, that's too dangerous. But fortunately, the vice president and the deans who were involved then said, if we don't show these, we're all resigning. And so did the director of extension say, and I'm resigning also. So they went ahead. And far from being aggravated, the provincial cabinet was very impressed. And they said, these people have got strengths. They know what they're talking about. They're willing to work. There is economic sense in what they're saying will help them redevelop rather than close the island or urge them to move off the island. So they entered into a partnership, in fact, with the people on Fogo in assisting them to build that high school in the middle of the island, to develop a fish fisheries cooperative, which processed and marketed their own product. For a while, a shipbuilding cooperative, which ultimately went bankrupt and failed, but did supply boats for a period of time. And that island continues today to have a fairly healthy economy, and the cooperative continues to thrive so far as I know. Though with the crises we are having these days, it's all fragile. Well, on the basis of, by the way, some of the cabinet members also said, we don't have time to go to all the rural places of Newfoundland, but we would like to respond. So they made films of the cabinet members and took those back to the people on Fogo Island. Well, on the basis of that beginning, Memorial University said we should do this in other places where we have field workers. And so, with help from the National Film Board of Canada, training, and financing from the Donner Canadian Foundation, we established at Memorial University a film unit that did two things. It produced a weekly technology transfer fisheries program for CJON called Dexawash, if you remember that. And that, of course, didn't reach all over the island because distribution was limited in those days before satellites. And it also went out to repeat the Fogo experiment in other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And it did that next in 1968 at Port au Choix on the northern peninsula. And in 1968, that place was beginning to hum a bit because they had the Northern Regional Development Association with 7 regions for the whole of the northern peninsula and even the other side of the Labrador Straits. It was the birthing place of the Fishermen's Union, where Father McGraw was in the Port au Choix area. I remember in 67, for the first time in Newfoundland history, a delegation from rural Newfoundland, under their own expenses, went to Ottawa to lobby with the federal government on their own behalf. That was unheard of in those days. Everything went through Joey. So that was the beginning of an exciting time. So the next film project took place at Port au Choix, focusing on the efforts of the Northern Regional Development Association, but also on the problems of the youth. And they did a lot of work on the youth at Port au Choix. And then a third project was done in southern Labrador in 69, where I was the field worker. And we made films along the southern coast of Labrador, which at that time, along with the south coast of Newfoundland, was probably the most isolated and neglected region of the whole province. This was all with 16 millimeter film. One of the disadvantages, or some of the disadvantages of 16 millimeter film, is that you needed a professional crew. The film had to be taken away and developed and physically edited. And there was a time lapse before people could see it and before it could get back to the community. But by 1968-69, video tape started to become accessible and reasonably inexpensive. So that by 1970, at which time we had increased from 3 field workers in extension to a dozen field workers, we each had video equipment placed in our regional offices. And this equipment at that time we thought was pretty exciting stuff compared to what you're seeing now. It was pretty darn bulky. It was 3/4 inch tape with heavy reel-to-reel decks and fairly small cameras. And we started out with something called Shebaden and went from that to a Sony format afterwards. Our original attempts were a disaster in a way because after about a month, a year on the shelf, all the videotape turned to snow. So we don't have very much archival material from those early attempts. But at that time, when I got the video equipment in Labrador, we were able to put the films that had been done onto videotape and then take the videotapes around and show them to people. One of the things that really helped me in the Labrador work was that I first and foremost showed the Fogo Island films and the Port au Choix films to the Labrador people. And when they looked at that, of course, they said, these are real people like us. And they related to them. And they said, geez, we're just as smart as they are. We know as much as they do. They don't have anything over us. If they can do it, we can do it. So by the time we made a decision to film in Labrador, everybody says, yeah, we really would like to do that. So that was the third time we used film and then video in Labrador.